Secret of the Mimic gave us a lot to talk about, and I really want to get to what it means for the rest of the franchise, but we have a lot to talk about the game itself before we're ready to do anything else. Just as an example of how dense this game is, on Monday I released a full explainer video for the entire game, and I barely touched moon.exe, a 40-minute side quest that unlocks the secret ending. Because like, what is that, and what could it possibly mean? Well, I've slept on it. And I think that moon.exe is not only Fiona's perfect vision of the future, but it's also impossible. So slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. So like I said, what is moon.exe? On every monitor in the game, one of the options is to run moon.exe, and it pulls up a basic text-based adventure, but for the sake of ease, it's pre-recorded responses instead of typing in every possible solution. But as you play Secret of the Mimic, all the collectibles you collect end up inside of moon.exe, and if you have all 25, you're able to beat it to access the secret ending. So that being said, what is the actual game story of moon.exe? Like, what is happening in the game itself directly? Not a metaphor. What is this game? Well, we the player are trying to escape from Moon. Any misstep and Moon will force us back to sleep, starting over. But of course, to make it playable, you just restart at your most recent checkpoint. The player begins trapped inside a boarded up bedroom, but they escape out the window to see a cave and a forest. If you try to enter the cave immediately, Moon stops you and sends you back to bed. So you enter the forest and meet a baby owl. Throughout the forest, you can pet the owl, play with the owl, and even feed the owl at different points. And in the woods, we encounter a lot of different areas. There's a statue of a wedding couple where the man has a bow tie and the woman is burnt. There's a ruined seamstress shop that's been burnt to the ground, a lake next to a big rock, and eventually, you find a cabin tucked away deep inside the woods. And inside that cabin is an old woman who calls herself Sun, and she tells us to fix 3 masks to earn a reward: a bear mask, a foxy mask, and a rabbit mask. If you do this, she gives you the baby owl mask. Put it on will allow us to get past Moon to get inside the cave. But once we receive that mask, the baby owl is gone. When we enter the cave, Moon sees us wearing the baby owl mask and begins to cry. Inside is a statue of the baby owl with the text, "You will bring him back no matter the cost." Throughout the cave are ancient ruins of a workshop, filled with broken statues and incomplete projects, until eventually we find a statue with no arms or a head. Piecing the statue together, we create Moon. It sings and is reborn. We then fade through white and suddenly we're at the welcome show of Murray's Costume Manor. But if you speak to Mr. Helper, he says, "You rebuilt yourself, but now you are split in 2. Moon and Sun, destruction and life." I got a new fur thing. Let's see if it works. Been waiting to try this out. I mean, it's getting some of it, but it's not as effective as like a lint roller. It's a little disappointing, frankly. I don't know if it's just user error or what. Yeah, like it's getting some of the fur, but it's not super working. It was only like $5. During this second half of moon.exe, we go room through room, pretty much recreating the exact story of Secret of the Mimic, but now instead of defeating the animatronics, we're helping them. We're either giving them something they want or fixing the situation around them so they can find peace and be happy. Well, all except for Jackie, who we suck into rain boots to never be seen again. That part's weird. But Big Top, Dolly, and Chica all seem better because we visited them. They all have their problems solved. And it's also notable that when we give the Fall Fest ticket book to Big Top, he says, "This is the one. This is where Sun left, leaving them behind." And once we help all the animatronics, we end up in David's room, to which we place his 3 birthday presents in 3 chests, open the closet door, and upgrade our data diver in moon.exe. Once we've done this, we're able to talk to Sun one more time. "You have found my presents. You have completed my tasks. Now you will get your reward. Use this to bring him back. It's all in your hands now." And we receive the glitched permission, which allows us to access several secret doors in the manor to access the 3rd secret ending. And then it's over. So after playing through this, the first question is, what did any of that mean? Obviously, this story seems to be a massive allegory, frankly, a very thinly veiled allegory. But if so, the question that needs to be answered is, what is this an allegory for? Well, the first step to figuring out what the allegory is trying to say is nailing down what the characters are supposed to be representing. So let's go over a few anchors that make the most sense. And I think the first one that's most evident is Sun. F10N4, or Elite Speech for Fiona, the robotic version of Fiona, uses that exact same face when she talks to us. It's the M1 personality inside of the MXES console that we see at the end of the pizzeria segment. Because I mean, in that segment she uses the exact same face to talk to us, but that's not all. Big Top says Fallfest took Sun from us forever. And we have audio logs that say the human Fiona went to Fallfest, and Edwin Murray's first log after she died is, "Why did you go? You weren't even supposed to be there," which is seeming to say that she died at Fallfest. If that's true, moon.exe actually has some more to say about this, where the married couple statue has the woman be fully burned, and at her feet is a snow globe for Fallfest. And not only that, but in the woods there's that ruined seamstress building that's burnt to the ground, and Fiona was excellent at sewing together hand puppets. So it seems pretty definitive that Sun is meant to be Fiona, or at least I think specifically M1 or F10 and 4, the robotic recreation of Fiona. After all, the real Sun left long ago. All that's left is the Sun we know in the woods. I'm gonna be super real. I'm behind, and I have not had any time to record a real Gamersupps ad, but you should get some anyway, and you should use code RIGHTTOAST to get 10% off your whole order, because it's pretty damn good. I think another fairly evident anchor here is the baby owl being representative of David. This mainly comes from the statue we get in the cave, where the text along with it is, "You will bring him back no matter the cost." But it's also the idea of a baby that's being taken care of, right? We feed it, we pet it, we play with it, and it's literally a baby. So like, this lines up pretty well with David. I think another anchor we can lock down here is that our player character is not human. And this is mainly from the sun and moon illusion near the middle of the game, where we create the statue of Moon, fade to white, and then the next thing we hear is Mr. Helpful telling us that we are Sun and Moon. We have rebuilt ourselves. So I don't really see a human rebuilding themselves into Sun Moon. That doesn't quite make sense to me. So if we're considering our player as being non-human, what non-human characters are there to pick from? Well, frankly, it's just the Mimic. But when I say that, something that we need to clear up, and this game helps us to, what Mimic am I referring to? Throughout the game we play, we have the Mimic endoskeleton chasing us down, but we also have a few emails that lists M1 and M2 separately. And the endoskeleton we see in-game is violent and trying to kill us, but we see tapes of that same endoskeleton pretending to be Fiona. So which is it? What's going on here? Well, we know from this email that M2 was originally a copy of M1's programming. And from an audio log from Edwin, M2 is hard to create. He made M1 and M1 was successful, but he's not even sure how, and he's having trouble replicating that with M2. From the tone of the email, I think it's incredibly likely that M1 is F10 and 4, that robotic recreation of Fiona's personality in the Mimic. Essentially, the way I think that this whole Mimic scenario works is that the original schematics for the Mimic are the initial program that can replicate any personality, and M1 is the first successful branch that fully replicated one person, that person being Fiona. And Edwin is having trouble trying to do it again with M2. Not to mention, by the time of Secret of the Mimic, M1 or F10N4 is no longer in the Mimic endoskeleton. She's inside the MXES console, which is then renamed to the F10N4, where I keep getting that lead speech for Fiona. And I know it's supposed to be pronounced Fiona, but if I just say Fiona for both of these characters, it's gonna get confusing really quickly. So you could argue there's three characters here. There's M1/F10N4, the robotic recreation of Fiona, but specifically the personality. There's M2, a failed copy of that program that never really saw fruition, but is currently in the Mimic endoskeleton hunting us down, that has parts of David and Edwin's personality inside of it, and the Mimic endoskeleton itself, which seems to be able to have either one take over. So M1 is the first dataset that replicated Fiona, and M2 was supposed to replicate David, but after being beaten by Edwin, it all started to go awry. So when I say I think the player of moon.exe is the Mimic, what of these characters am I referring to? I think it makes the most sense to be specifically the Mimic endoskeleton with a brand new Mimic program inside of it, because M1 would have to be Sun, and M2 shouldn't have been created yet because David is still alive as the baby owl at the beginning of this game. So that's Sun, the baby owl, and the player. What other weird characters do we have to line up here? Because like obviously Big Top is still Big Top. Well, at this point, we're running low on characters we still haven't solved yet, so I think we can pretty definitively solve Moon. I know it's tempting to say since Sun is M1, Moon must be M2, but that's not quite it, I think. Especially because I believe once we receive the baby owl mask, that is the Mimic receiving M2, but we'll get there when we get there. So how do we then figure out who the Moon character is? Well, if the player is the Mimic endoskeleton, what does Moon do to us? Every time we make a misstep or stray too far, he puts us back to bed and we restart our journey. Almost like someone is watching the Mimic endoskeleton and trying to keep it contained and reset it in some way. That, plus the fact that M1 or Sun is Fiona, leads me to believe that Moon in moon.exe is meant to represent Edwin, someone who's keeping tabs on the Mimic, trying to keep it contained, and when is presented with the baby owl mask, bursts into tears and gives up. So we have our characters, then what is this story trying to tell us? Well, like I mentioned at the top, I think moon.exe is the ideal scenario and storyline that M1 wants to see made real. It's all she wants, it's everything she wants, but it's also impossible. So what does M1 want? I believe M1 or F10N4 tells us exactly what she wants. She even tries to tell Edwin, but he's not having it. She wants her child back. In making a copy of the Mimic that replicated Fiona, he essentially made a perfect motherly robot, a digital creation whose only purpose is to watch and take care of a child. And then due to Edwin's neglect, that child died. Imagine what this robot must be going through if your entire purpose for your entire creation is taken away from you. We even get a little bit of this in one of Fiona's best lines in the game when you're leaving on the elevator and she says,
"I miss you, but I miss my child."
I think moon.exe is M1 telling Arnold through the system exactly what she wished could have happened. So then, what does this allegory mean in the real world if it's what M1 wanted to happen in the first place? Well, to figure that out, it's time to do some analysis. Some literary analysis! Thanks for hitting the subscribe button. The story of moon.exe in the real world is, in my belief, as follows. We are the Mimic. Right now, M1 may or may not be inside of our endo. Nothing here is quite one-to-one with the real world, especially the beginning of this program. But right now we feel compelled to spend time with David, and we do so. We take care of him, play with him, feed him. It's almost like he's our own son. Almost. He isn't quite our son though, is he? We're a robot, he's a human. But M2 could be. M2 could be our real child, but Edwin isn't able to make it work. He was able to make M1, a version of the Mimic that became Fiona quite well, but making another persona from a copy of our own programming was proving too difficult. And it's at this point that Sun gives the player the owl mask, or Fiona gives something to the Mimic. What does that mean here? Well, if we're the Mimic and we receive the owl mask, in my mind this is a clear indicator that we receive the personality of David, right? A mask or disguise of the baby owl. But here's where things get confusing. When you receive the baby owl mask, the baby owl disappears from the game. If you ask Sun where it went, she smiles and said he flew away. And if you check her stove before you receive the owl mask and your baby owl is alive, her stove is cold and not being used. But after we receive the owl mask, her stove is on, and something on it smells like chicken. Moon.exe is directly implying that Sun killed the baby owl to make the baby owl mask. And following our allegory, that would mean that M1 killed David, which seems really out of place. Like, don't get me wrong, M1 or the Mimic would have means and opportunity to kill David. After all, on the birthday he died, the Mimic was the only one sent out to the playground to go get him. The playground that's right next to a very dangerous shipping yard that the Mimic could have just opened and let him inside of thus leading to the accident. But even though means and opportunity are there, there's not a clear motive here. As far as we're aware, like I mentioned, M1's primary objective is being a mother. And sure, David isn't technically M1's child, but in all the footage we have of M1, she treated David like her son, calling him darling, watching after him, taking him to birthday parties. So suddenly killing David seems very out of character. So then, if she did, why would she have? Well, I actually have an idea for this, but this video is already quite long and it's a whole separate theory. So you'll have to wait for a future video for my explanation, but I'll give you a teaser now. I think M1 figured out why she's successfully able to copy Fiona, and it has to do with going through her own memory banks and seeing her own creation. But meanwhile, M2 was not successful in copying whatever Edwin was trying to have it copy yet. And there's one key thing that made M1 successful that she might need for M2 to be successful. Regardless, back to moon.exe, once we receive the baby owl mask, the moon cries when he sees us and we can get into the cave. Or rather, as an allegory, in M1's perfect version of events, once Edwin sees that M2 successfully copied David, Edwin is left powerless to stop us and we enter the factory. M2 then goes through this abandoned factory until eventually he finds enough pieces to build himself a body. Sun Moon, the daycare attendant from Security Breach. Now, I want to be very clear here. Yes, the visual depiction is just Moon, but keep in mind the very next dialogue we get is Mr. Helpful literally saying, "You are Sun and Moon." But think about what this means. In Fiona's perfect version of these events, M2, once it realizes that it is Fiona's son, makes a new body for itself that's half sun and half moon. Literally a replica of a child of two people, half and half, pieces from both. And now that he's all grown up with his own body, he begins the journey to let Fiona out of Mexus so she can re-enter the Mimic and they can both live in the physical world together. So her perfect son goes through the Murray's Costume Manor facility and assists all of the animatronics in finding peace and finding rest, giving Big Top as many tickets as he could ever want, fixing Dolly's animatronics, visiting Chica and giving her that birthday party she's looking for. And eventually he makes it back to his home, where he finds the rest of his memories and is able to disable cradle.exe, which lets Fiona out of Mexus, where she can re-enter the Mimic endoskeleton. He saves himself so he can go back and save his mother. And at the very end, when the story is over, Fiona talks to us, the player, Arnold, directly. She showed us this vision, and from how we responded to it, she is confident that we could be the ones to set things right and finally help M2 reclaim itself. And in doing so, she trusts us with the glitch permission that lets us get there. In other words, all of this, moon.exe in general, seems to be a test for any Fazbear employee who walks in here. And Arnold just so happens to be someone who could have passed. Arnold could have seen M1's perfect scenario, responded correctly, and received the tools to make the best solution out of what is currently in front of us. But it's one that's impossible. Not only is that not what happens as Arnold goes through the facility and destroys several of these animatronics, but the only way to beat moon.exe is to have every collectible. And one of the most important ones, the White Tiger plushie, only spawns randomly after you've beaten the game and start New Game Plus. It's a plushie that doesn't exist for Arnold. So unfortunately, Fiona's perfect story can never be. And that's why she's still trying to make it happen to this day, I think anyway. But that's just moon.exe. What do the endings themselves mean? Well, that we'll probably leave for next week, because the endings themselves, I think, illuminate how we get to later games in the franchise. But for now, moon.exe is a beast of enough itself. So what do you think? Did I hit the nail on the head? I love that the lore in this game is so up to interpretation. Like, we have a lot of information here, but there are so many ways you can take what the game presents that aren't necessarily wrong, even if they entirely conflict. I think it's one of this game's best strengths. In the meantime, if you missed it, I took all of my Secret of the Mimic playthrough streams and edited them together into 2 separate videos, my main playthrough and my New Game Plus playthrough, both of which are on Right2st. Both parts are right here, go check them out. If you want your fan art featured on the channel, make sure to share it with #ToastArt. A huge thank you to the best channel members, the Dough Risers, and until next time, as always, stay toasty, slices.